Have you been giving too many permissions to your Entra IDs? Even if you have a conditional access that requires you to have an MFA? Well, fortunately, in this video, we have Daniel Heinzen from SpectreOps, who's going to walk you around how attackers on the internet are bypassing MFA, even if you have a conditional access policy for it. He also talks about how to avoid this mistake as well. So I would definitely recommend this if you work as an Entra or Azure admin in your organization. Now, Daniel made this video as part of the Advent.Cloud Security. So this video would also be available on advent.cloudsecuritypodcast.tv. But for now, enjoy the video with Daniel on how attackers bypass the MFA of conditional access.
Hi, today we're going to be talking about conditional access policies in Entra. So my name is Daniel. I go by HotNops on the socials, and I'm a service architect at SpectreOps, and I do some cloud security research. I'm going to show some of that research with you today. Just as a little background, I feel like I can't escape it. Every time I talk, I have to talk about OAuth. So I'm going to do a quick background because this is really important to understand how conditional access policies work under the hood. Entra is kind of built on top of this OAuth flow. And to understand that, we have to understand like the four identities. So I talk about this in my previous video too, which if you haven't watched is not necessary to watch, but I think it can be helpful. There's the resource owner, and that's usually like the human or the person that's accessing some resource from an API. So whether that be like photos or chat messages, and the client is the actual application that is going to be accessing that resource on behalf of the user. So that could be a desktop application or a cloud application. And that makes a big difference when it comes to conditional access, as we'll see in a minute. The authorization server for our purposes is going to be the login.microsoftonline.com. That is the server that's responsible for validating credentials and issuing tokens. And lastly, there's the resource server, and that is the actual API that you're trying to hit to obtain some sort of resource. So whether that be your chat message, your email, your picture, etc. Right. So having that said, keep this in mind, because when we talk about what conditional access policies are actually enforcing, it's important to know that it's intended to protect the resource on the resource server. Okay. So having that said, I'm going to hop into my ops VM, and I'll kind of walk you through how we might navigate through some of these conditional access policies as an attacker. Okay, so if we hop over to our ops VM, see here I have my Mythic C2 running, and I have an agent calling back from a hybrid joined workstation. And because it's hybrid joined, it has a single sign-on setup. So we can simply just ask for a token. We don't have to find it in like a file or something like that. So I'm going to be using a .NET assembly called sharpget enter token for the client 1950A, that blah, 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 blah. That's the PowerShell client. The B17 is my HotNops tenant, and we want a token for the graph.windows.net audience because I'm going to be using it with Road Recon. Okay, and so I'm going to download that output. It's task 52. So I'm going to move over to terminal here, and I'm going to move task 52 to here. And I'm just going to cat that out. And so I'm going to use Road Recon to gather our environment. So I'm trying to, or I'm mimicking a kind of what we do on an engagement. And I think it's TAC token, TAC access token. Okay, and I'll paste that here. Okay, so we are off. So now what we'll do is do a road recon gather. And lastly, road recon GUI policies. We're going to generate some policies in HTML. I'm sorry, plugin policies. And I'm going to open that up. And lastly, I'm going to run a road recon GUI. Okay, so from a from kind of like an engagement perspective, the first thing that we're going to look at here is this requirement MFA accept one, which is we are including all of our applications except for the Office 365 applications. And this could be kind of our window in, because while a lot of applications are going to use all sorts of scopes that go outside of Office 365, remember that when we are locking down access, we're not locking down access to the client, we are locking down access to the resource. And so when we exclude the resource, we're not just excluding like Word or Outlook, we're excluding any client that is accessing said resource, right? Uh, so I'll show you how we could take advantage of that. So to do that, let's open up Road Recon, and I'll show you we have, just to kind of stage this, we have a user, and so we take this user list and we would probably do a password spray on all of these people. But I already created one called weak password. So let's assume that this user has a weak password and we are able to spray it and get an MFA prompt. And so to do that, I'm just going to turn on MFA. So the reason why I had this off in the first place is just to make sure that the demo went smoothly for like the workstation logging in. So this is a very, very overly restrictive policy, because we are saying if we are going to exclude all cloud apps unless your Office. So like the WAM module on my workstation, things like that. Like if they're accessing any resource outside of Office, it's going to get blocked. But now we can turn it on and we can kind of see what that's going to look like. So if we were to open up a private window, so we have no state or no context, we are going to try to log in as that user, but we need to identify an application first, right? So let's go over to Road Recon. And what I'll do is look at app roles, and I'm going to look at graph. And we'll see that we have some privileged permissions here, but nothing too interesting. So let's go back and let's look at OAuth 2 permissions. And you'll see here, this is on purpose. We have this principal name of weak password consented to all these permissions for a particular application. And because we have the password, we could say, okay, well, I'm going to target this particular application. And so what we can do is that particular application is called cap test. And so we are going to try to log into this app ID and see if we can get a token. Because remember, we have some exclusions. So even if the app itself is using all sorts of scopes that are outside of the Office scope, we can kind of narrow that down until we don't hit that MFA anymore, and try to get access to some things that I think a reasonable administrator would say you probably would not have access to. So let's go open up our incognito terminal, and I am going to copy in a link here, and I kind of have it pre-broken out. So these two lines are identical. I just have new lines, so it's easy to read. And so what we're doing is we're saying, I'm going to log in to this cap test application. I'm going to get an implicit grant token type. And just for the sake of this demo, I have the redirect URI set to jwt.ms, so it's easy to read. But typically, this would be like a redirect URI of wherever the application is going to send the auth code or the token to. And lastly, we're not asking for any kind of scope. We're just asking for OpenID, and that's it, right? So we're not asking to read chats or anything like that. So I'm going to copy this whole line, and I'm going to paste it in incognito. And I think what you'd expect is we should just get a scope token, or I'm sorry, an OpenID scope in our token. So we're going to log in as weak password at hotnops.com. And remember, we are able to spray that password, so we have their plain text. You'll see that we are not triggered in MFA, right? And just to prove that MFA is on, let's try to access portal. You see, that triggers, right? So here we got this access token without MFA. If we did have MFA, it would be in this MFA claim. And you'll see that we get all of the scopes that we consented to that fall within that office scope. So this is kind of just to say that we need to be really careful as administrators, as intra tenant administrators, that our exclusions are appropriate, because that office exclusion is really common. In fact, if you go on like Stack Overflow or Reddit, you'll often see that is recommended to be excluded. But some of the things in here are absolutely things you want protected by your MFA. So let's take this a step further. I'm going to put my hoodie up and we're going in. I'm going to save this access token off. And remember, this is all without MFA. And I'm just going to do a curl on the me endpoint, which is like the who is or who am I endpoint, right? And you'll see we have insufficient privileges. And the reason why that is if we go back, we don't have user.read in here, right? There's no user.read. But there is lots of other stuff like chat. I see chat.read. Okay, so let's take advantage of that. So in the Graph API, you could just add chats to the end. So me/chats. And you'll see we actually have some chats here, right? And if we go one step further, and I'm kind of assuming knowledge of the API here. So like I typically have to like Google this, but since I've just done a walkthrough, this is fresh in my mind. You'll see that we have chats here and we can do messages and we have some messages, right? And just for readability, we can pipe this out to JQ and format it. And so here's some messages sent back and forth between two users. One is I'm locked out. And this says your new password is password123. And it says, oh, by the way, the Wi-Fi password is it's all in the reflexes. So this is kind of an example of how we can obtain tokens without MFA, even though we have strict MFA policies, and use it to further our goal as a red teamer or a pen tester, as an attacker. So that's really about it. If you have any questions, please follow me on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever you use as HotNops. And the last thing I want to mention is we do teach an Azure Security Fundamentals class that we are offering at SoCon 2025, which is in Alexandria in DC. So that is on March 31st through April 1st for the conference, and the trainings are in early April. So if this is interesting to you, come find us, and I hope this was helpful. We'll see you around. Later.